Okay, looks like we're live.
All right.
Okay. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hey, Aaron, what's up?
Let's take a couple moments to make sure everything is functioning correctly. This is our second go around doing this live stream thing, so we just want to make sure that it's all functioning properly. Yeah, that's going good on our Patreon page. And the only thing that I think I wanted to try to figure out was how we actually monitor any commenting that comes our way. So let me mute that. And okay, so I don't know if this is the correct way we're supposed to do this, but I have the YouTube page open up to our live stream. So I'll just keep that over here on the side, and if we get any stragglers who wander in to our discussion, then we can make sure we see that. Okay. All right, so why don't we get started here? So
sure.
Today is the first episode or the first class of our series on Ravenloft, the Realms of Terror Redux, where Rob and I are going to do what amounts to a year-long masterclass in all things Ravenloft. From the 5th edition Curse of Strahd all the way back to the original manual, everything in between, including Mask of the Red Death, Gothic Earth stuff. And we are going to be, all of the content that is currently not available in 5th edition, as it appears in Curse of Strahd, we're going to go through and we're going to pluck bits and pieces and cobble together a campaign setting that is usable and playable in 5th edition. And in addition, we're going to be filling in what we see as gaps in the story of Curse of Strahd, expanding things out based on our own kind of dark aesthetic.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So I figured we could go over the course syllabus today. Let me grab that real quick and let's see, where are you?
All right. And in the meantime, let's perhaps discuss this a little bit more. For those of you joining us, this may very well be your first time seeing anything from Aaron and myself. So very quickly, we should probably introduce ourselves. My name is Robert Randall. And this is Aaron Campbell, and together we do the Adventure Hook podcast together, where we take singular hooks for adventures and flesh them out into full, ideas that you could use as a GM in your own campaigns, or even base a whole new campaign around. And Aaron and I have decided that one of the additional things that we're going to be doing is fleshing out the Ravenloft setting, which is something that is very near and dear to both of our hearts. And for both of us, go back to where we first started playing it when it was first being published back in the early 90s, and we've been fans ever since then. So we have a pretty good understanding both of this setting and why and a love affair with it. And so why we're doing this and why it's important, we think, to explore not just the Curse of Strahd, but to go back to the beginning and dissect everything, all the iterations in between, is because Curse of Strahd, in a very real way, is very much like the first edition of the original Ravenloft adventure. And so while it takes a lot of cues from that, there's a great deal more that it sort of understands about the world of Ravenloft as it evolved over the many editions. And so while it looks like it's taking a step back, in a way it's almost like a retcon. And understanding where this setting has been and the various changes it has gone through could be very, very useful for you as you create your own Curse of Strahd and beyond Ravenloft campaigns going forward. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing with the masterclass here.
Yeah. So, and real quick, for those who are not familiar, we're more than just Aaron and Rob. We're both comic pros. I work more in the creative side. Rob is more on the publishing side, but Rob also is a writer as well. He's done a really cool, a really incredible horror book called Serial Artist that came out a few years ago. And my latest book was for Image Comics called Infidel, which was also a horror book, which is now getting, well, it's been optioned for film by TriStar.
It's been getting an incredible amount of press and has been even named one of NPR's top 100 horror books of all time. So, and a lot of that is due to Aaron's incredibly creepy art, which, you know, Aaron and I share a very creepy gothic aesthetic, which of course is what Ravenloft is all about, and why we feel like we can add a lot to the texture of this setting.
Yeah.
This is going to be fun.
So I got that syllabus up. So let me run through that real quick, just so you know what we're going to be talking about for the next couple hours or so. First, we're going to do sort of a quick overview of the different texts that we plan to source primarily for this. I mean, there's a lot of content, especially in the second edition area. There's tons of stuff.
Too much, in a way.
Yeah, there's too much. We can't cover everything, and certainly I don't own everything. My collection has been growing.
Yeah, together we own a lot, though, and we can cite and source all kinds of weird, obscure stuff, most likely, as we go.
Yeah, and we're gonna give the great thing is we're gonna do a lot of buzz marketing for Drive-Thru RPG, even though they probably have no idea who we are or that we exist. But our Drive-Thru RPG is like the best source for getting old content for incredibly cheap, so you don't have to drop several $100s on a single supplement. I mean, I was really lucky with the Mask of Red Death. I was able to get that for like $50, which is as much as you would pay for a new hardcover. I think Curse of Strahd is $50. So I was really lucky with that. So you can get some stuff on eBay if you're like a completist and you want that original content. You want that tactile sensation. But Drive-Thru RPG is going to be really a great resource if you want to follow along and you want to build out a campaign that is going to look like what we end up creating for a campaign world. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about. Then we're going to get into sort of the main story and themes of Ravenloft. We're going to do a little overview of the setting itself if you're not quite familiar, and we're going to do some talking about Count Strahd Von Zarovich, the central figure. Then we are going, and especially the titular figure in Curse of Strahd. So then we're going to do a history, and we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the setting itself, just like in terms of the publication and the evolution of the campaign setting through the years as it's appeared in different editions. And then with sort of our ultimate focus being on Curse of Strahd. And then finally, Rob is going to take us on a little journey through Tarokka theory and practical application. And basically a different way to look at Tarokka rather than just a quest-giving item.
Which it still can serve that purpose, most definitely.
Because if you take that purpose away from it, then you don't have Curse of Strahd anymore.
Well,
So at least not the way it's written. So
and it is designed to take some of those random elements to piece together to create almost its own little sandbox each time. So that, in theory, the idea, I think originally the way it was written is it was always supposed to be almost replayable just by different groups of people or whatever. And even if you came back to that adventure, well, Strahd would be in a different place, or the weapon you needed to destroy him was either different or in a different area or whatever. All that kind of random element to it is fun, to piece it together one way or another. But the central core stuff still needed to stick, know.
Yeah. Okay. So first, let's go over the materials we're going to be using. So, of course, we've got Curse of Strahd because we are doing this we are focusing on this from a 5th edition perspective. Because even though our podcast Adventure Hook isn't technically about 5th edition, we kind of find ourselves falling into 5th edition quite a bit. And Pathfinder by way of Rob mainly plays Pathfinder. I mainly play 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. So the two of them kind of overlap pretty well in terms of story and content and meta stuff.
Exactly. And I actually do incorporate quite a few 5th edition rules. So I'm playing a hybrid no matter what, but we were always doing that because I was using house rules and all that other stuff. So while I like Pathfinder as a backbone, I like the both the setting and the kind of core concepts of D&D 5th edition. I really like the direction that it's gone. And it seems like Curse of Strahd is a great way to bring a bunch of new people into the hobby, which chances are that's who you are. You've come here for help on how to make Curse of Strahd either work better or make more sense or be more dynamic or textured or versatile or whatever it is that you're looking to do. That's what we're here for. We love that kind of stuff. And it's a lot about what we do together. So yeah, definitely Curse of Strahd, but also you have, what was it? A print to order version of the first edition of it, right? Yeah. That's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah. So I don't have, the original one. So the one like, other than the maps, this is an incredible little piece of binding for really cheap. So it's absolutely the original, and it even does have the maps. But one thing that's great about Drive-Thru RPG is you can combine PDF and print on demand. So I think I ended up getting this for maybe $15. $10 to $15.
That's great
for the PDF and the printed edition. And so what's great with the PDFs is that gives you access to the maps so that you don't have to that's sort of the one issue is that you get aspects of the map caught in the seam. But the thing is, though, you don't really need those maps because they almost are identical basically in Curse of Strahd. And Curse of Strahd has a really great map of the castle on the back of this Barovia map, if you're not familiar.
Oh, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah. Sweet. So, which is, that's
old school. I recognize that map.
Yeah.
But new colors and stuff. That looks great.
So that's one of my criticisms about 5th edition content right now is that they don't come with enough pull-out maps. I think that every hardcover, every campaign setting, everything should come with at least one pull-out map. So that was really, I really appreciated that with Ravenloft. So yeah, like I said, you don't really need it for this. But the reason we're going to be looking at Ravenloft, the original module, is A, nostalgia's sake, and B, to see how things have changed, and to see if there's anything that can be resurrected from this old stuff. Which there's not a whole lot that's different, but there is one key difference that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So that's the second book that we're going to be using. The third book that we're going to be using is Domains of Dread,
right?
Which is the last second edition volume that TSR created,
right?
For the full Ravenloft campaign setting. So this covers all of the other domains. If you're not familiar, Ravenloft itself began as just the domain of Barovia, which was overseen by the Dark Lord Strahd. And over the years, other domains were pulled in by the Dark Powers, the mysterious entities that govern the Domains of Dread. And each domain is connected to a Dark Lord. So this was the final one, but we'll be using this one probably pretty extensively, and the predecessor to this one, which I don't have a hard copy of. I have the
I do
PDF. Yeah, I have the so Rob has the hard copy. I have the PDF from Drive-Thru RPG, and that was that's where we're getting our name from. That was the Realm of Terror box set, 2nd edition. Which was kind of called
mine is almost like falling apart, and
but so we'll be using that, and we're using those because they both represent different points in time,
right,
for the Ravenloft timeline. It's going to be a little while before we really get into domains because we are going to be focusing primarily on Barovia,
right? Well, that's because that's what Curse of Strahd is set. Only in Barovia. The rest of what became known as the core, the greater Ravenloft, land, was not formed at the time of that story. They have basically rolled the clock back to basically redesign probably everywhere where the setting can go from here. And so while understanding all of like the book you're holding, Aaron, is probably the version of Ravenloft that you're most familiar with, because that was the one that I used when I ran for us.
Yeah.
You know, I loved the box set and all that stuff, but I loved that one, the one you're holding. And I tried to use everything that I could, because it really tried to shuffle the deck once again and make it all merge, which, you know, now is kind of like been, you know, I don't know, just the clock has been wound back. Time is all different, and a lot of different things, like there are changes to discuss.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, my theory is that the other domains do exist in Curse of Strahd, you just don't know they exist, and you don't know how to get to them. So, and we'll talk about that later on. As we get deeper into Curse of Strahd, we'll kind of move through the book itself, talking about the different NPC characters, the different locations, because we build a lot of that out. I've been specifically building a lot of that content out, because sort of one of the reasons why I thought this would be a good idea is that the way Curse of Strahd exists right now, it's very much a sandbox, and that's cool. There's some of the greatest adventure modules were sandboxes, with just kind of, here's an NPC with a bit of motivation and some backstory, and here's a location, and here's a thing, and like it's just kind of like different places you can go. But for me, my personal preference in storytelling in D&D is that everything is connected via story. So what we want to do with Curse of Strahd is take all of the bits and pieces, the Washters and Vlakoviches from Vallaki, Babalai Saga, the priest in Barovia, Kresk, and the abbot, and the Amber Temple, and the Wizard of the Wines, and take all of that and tie a narrative thread through the campaign, that you can basically, so you can move through it, and you can kind of unfold the story of Strahd.
Right. While still preserving its sandbox elements. We're not, like, there's just like ways to think about this stuff in, 1, 2, even 3 levels deeper than what's sort of written on the surface of the adventure. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And we want to get back. So one thing that's, I know we're getting away from, the books that we're using, because there's a few more books I want to highlight, but one of the things that's interesting about Ravenloft as a setting and in terms of its publication history is that the original module, the I-6 module, the only way to escape Barovia is to kill Strahd. So that was the entire point of it. But Domains of Dread and the Realm of Terror assume that adventuring party that showed up in this module were killed by Strahd, and that Strahd was never destroyed, and that the Dark Lords themselves really can't be destroyed. And they are the ones, like, each of these domains were prisons specifically created for that individual. And so the idea that we're playing with is that there needs to be other ways that you can resolve Curse of Strahd without just killing Strahd. So that it can fit in with the themes of Domains of Dread and Realm of Terror. That idea that the Dark Lords are eternal, and that the dark powers themselves will see to it that no one can destroy them, because they want them to be tormented for all eternity.
Their toys can be destroyed at their discretion, not yours.
Yeah. So the other one we're going to be using, and this is another one that I do not have a physical copy of. I'm keeping an eye on eBay so I can get one. But it is the sequel to the original module. It was called House on Griffin Hill. And it came out. Well, I'll talk about that when I talk about the publication history. But anyway, it was like sort of it could be a sequel, or it could also be a module that you could combine with the original module and run them all together. And what that module did was, I think it seeded in the minds of the creators at TRC, and especially William W. Connors, who is the one who wrote Mask of the Red Death. But I think that seeded in them the idea of Gothic Earth.
right?
Because it takes place in a little seaside village that feels very much like a small, a small provincial town on the coast of Cornwall in southern England. Mm-hmm. So, and there's instead of the Tarokka deck, they use mesmerism, and like one of the main NPCs is in a wheelchair, and everyone wears like button-up three-piece suits, and it's very Victorian in aspect. Mm-hmm. But what the House on Griffin Hill does is it adds an entirely new layer to Strahd's character. And we can get into that later. We don't have to get into that too detailed right now, but the idea in Griffin Hill is that there are two Strahds. There's good Strahd, there's evil Strahd. That Strahd had built this apparatus to free himself of his evil nature, and in so doing, he created two versions of himself. Mm-hmm. The one that we know and love as the vampire, and then the other one who is an alchemist and sort of he's a Poindextery kind of academic who's trying to finish the work and be done with the creature Strahd all for once and for all.
Yeah, it's Jekyll and Hyde meets H.P. Lovecraft. Mm-hmm. And actually the apparatus became very central in the later editions, like that sort of concept, and also like there's sort of an alchemical aspect to even the idea of the apparatus, which is very interesting and interesting that we could explore as far as like comparing and contrasting, quote unquote, the two Strahds.
Yeah. And so we're going to put links to all this stuff, especially the stuff that we can't show you, and links back to our Patreon page, because I guess the one thing that we should have noted before we even got started was that today's episode is going to be free for everybody to watch. This is the introduction. So if you want to come in and audit the class, you can do so today. But after today, the show is going to go patron only through our Patreon page, and there'll be two different tiers, a $5 tier and an $8 tier that gives you different access to the show and all the content that we'll be generating as we go along. So at any rate, like I said, House on Griffin Hill is going to be the second thing. And the idea here is that the way that they conceived of House on Griffin Hill originally as something that can be run as either a sequel or as a combined larger adventure. We are going to play with that idea, and we are going to bring House on Griffin Hill into Curse of Strahd, and we're going to revamp the whole thing for 5th edition and make it fit and make it work. So, but we'll talk about that in a future episode. And then I think the final book that we're going to use, or box set rather, is the Mask of the Red Death.
Right.
So, and then here is this is the big book that comes inside the box. And also what comes inside the box are 3 small adventures. There's like there's Red Tide, Red Jack, and Red Death. So this one is the Poe adventure, or the Poe story, Mask of the Red Death, the main one.
Right.
You have the Jack the Ripper set in Boston, and then you have Dracula. And this one is very much the kind of like the I can't remember if it's sort of like the escape from Dracula's castle, or if it's once Dracula has arrived.
It's Dracula arrives to London. It's basically that part of the story. Yeah. And also I that was another one, even way back to high school, we were playing Mask of the Red Death. So yeah, I have my stuff too, but I have a lot of those other books that I don't think you do have, Aaron. I have the the Gothic Earth Gazetteer.
Oh yeah, I have that. I do have that.
Okay, and I also have the Guide to Transylvania.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think I have pretty much everything Gothic Earth ever.
That's everything. That's everything that was ever created for Gothic Earth. And so the reason we're bringing this in is because we both have sort of a passion for 1890s Ravenloft. We've already done one episode where we focus on creating an adventure for Gothic Earth, which is set in here in northern New Mexico in the 1890s, centered around. It's very Cthulhian. It's all centered around a silver mine where they uncover something that connects you to Yig, the Cthulian snake god.
Something that should have best had laid buried.
Yeah. So that's a fun one. If you like, go back and listen to that one. We'll put a link to that in the down in the comments and stuff too.
But the point, I guess the point of the Gothic Earth, though, is in running these parallel, Gothic Earth requires sort of a different approach to rules. We were, I think we were talking about this yesterday too on our intro, but the idea of non-weapon proficiencies and skills and professions are much more important in a Victorian era than they would be in, a medieval fantasy quote unquote era. And so we're going to be updating Mask of the Red Death for 5e, which I think should excite, it excites me. So hopefully that excites you guys.
So like the reason that we're bringing this in, which I didn't quite finish saying, is that we are, as we update House on Griffin Hill, we are going to set it in Gothic Earth. So the village of Mordenshire, where that adventure takes place, will be a village on the south of Cornwall in the 1890s. So and we'll get more into like our theories of why we chose to do that in a later episode.
Right.
But some of the things that we're going to do with this, we're going to update. There's 4 main character classes in here: soldier, tradesman, adept, and mystic. Each one of these sort of approximates one of the core original D&D character classes: warrior, rogue, wizard, and cleric. So we're going to update those for 5th edition. We're going to take the character kits in here. They have different kits like cavalryman and charlatan and shaman, and those are going to become like perhaps backgrounds. And then we're going to build out proficiencies using non-weapon proficiencies for 5th edition. So, and we'll get into that. It'll be probably a few episodes or a little while before we get to here. Because we're going to begin by focusing on Curse of Strahd, obviously, and Barovia itself. So I think that's all of the main content we're going to go through. And again, we're going to put that whole list in the comments so that if you want to follow along, you can go straight to DriveThruRPG, get the PDFs if you want, or search around on eBay, see if you can get the old stuff. Because a lot of it, like Domains of Dread, you can get this thing super cheap. I think I got this guy for like $10 on eBay. It's kind of beat up, but who cares?
Still legible.
It's the content we want. So, so I think having said that, we should move on and talk about what Ravenloft is all about.
Right.
Why don't you start with
okay. Well, that's good. That's a good question. What is Ravenloft? And I think the best way to talk about Ravenloft is to talk about the questions we never answer, right? Like, for instance, probably the most important question in all of Ravenloft is who or what are the dark powers, right? And the dark powers are just these inscrutable forces that one way or another are causing events to happen in the land of Ravenloft, which starts out as the land of Barovia, and Strahd as its, captive king, so to speak, who is both tormentor and tormented, and, the despot and, tyrant of his people, but also its iron fist of justice. Also, basically the foundation of all of its storied history, is this central figure, Strahd, who is undoubtedly the dark powers' favorite plaything of all of their playthings, And so, can you hear me okay, Aaron?
Yeah, no, I muted my speaker so I wouldn't, because it keeps kind of every time I cough or I sniffle, it flashes back to me. So I wanted to give the floor full.
Gotcha. All right, sorry, I thought we lost
full view of the floor. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, okay, I thought we lost sound.
No,
I was just sitting here talking. It did nothing. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So anyway, so the dark powers, whatever they are, whatever they might be. I mean, Aaron and I have reimagined the dark powers as sort of certain elements or perhaps factions both allied or perhaps against one another, of what H.P. Lovecraft would have deemed the outer gods, right? But regardless of defining or not defining them, as far as our player characters are concerned, they'll never understand them, never know them, probably never be addressed by them or any of their emissaries or anything like that. They are just these puppet masters who can literally create demiplanes, which is what Ravenloft is. It is called the demiplane of dread, and it hovers in its own little bubble somewhere in the ethereal mists of, or in the Shadowfell, perhaps in 5th edition.
Yeah.
But
the Shadowfell, actually, just to point in, yesterday I kind of incorrectly said that there was no content created during 4th edition, which is not completely true. They toyed with creating content throughout the entire thing. I guess they were working on a 4th edition rulebook that got canned like somewhere around 2011. But before that, I think in their Planescape, their manual of the planes or whatever that they released, it discusses, or it just references, that the domains of Dread and Ravenloft are in the Shadowfell somewhere. So that's where that idea comes from.
Okay, well, that actually makes sense as far as, like, we've talked about the Shadowfell on other shows, but, you know, it's basically the idea, sort of the anti-Fae, right? If the Fae sort of embodies everything, you know, libido and life and love and joy and, you know, stories and heroes and legends and gods and all that great stuff, the Shadowfell is sort of its opposite, right? Everything dark, everything that, you know, is, you know, decaying and entropic and gothic, right? That kind of stuff, the dark and the bloody and the corrupt, right? And that's really what Ravenloft is. It's like an entire realm of gothic horror. And, you know, I mean, and that the dark powers explain how that happens, because they pluck particularly despicable evil people from around the multiverse, and they give them everything from, like, a single haunted house to an entire land, an entire kingdom like Darkon.
Yeah.
You know, which you know, is Azalin the Lich King ruled, at least in 2nd and 3rd edition. Right. But so the idea is that it's sort of this prison domain, and for one reason or another, sometimes good people, heroes and the like, find themselves either drawn into the mists of Ravenloft, or they are from another realm, like Kryn or Toril, the Forgotten Realms, or Athis, Dark Sun, any of these places, right? Right? They all have their corresponding villains in Ravenloft. And that was even one of the big reveals in the Domains of Dread book we love so much, which was the you know, revealing that Vecna got imprisoned by the Dark Powers. The Vecna, you know, was still a plaything for the Dark Powers. You know,
as well as his ally manservant turned enemy Cass.
Right.
So yeah, they both got sucked in and got their own little domains. And
yeah,
they
put them right next to each other, so they would constantly have to war, and then the Dark Powers are probably just laughing their asses off.
Yeah,
about the whole thing, right?
But the problem is, like, as a Dark Lord in Ravenloft, in the Domains of Dread, you are at the same time the Lord of your domain. That's why Strahd always says, "I am the land."
Right.
Because the land was made for him. The two are inextricably connected. But they are also, like Rob said earlier, prisoners, which means that Strahd himself can never leave his domain. So it's an especially, you know, like ironic punishment or insidious punishment for Vecna and Cass, that they come to hate each other so greatly. They're right next to each other, but the two of them could never meet. They can never face each other again. They have to send their proxies out.
Yeah, and these terrible wars that are completely pointless.
Yeah,
you know, or whatever. But that's sort of Ravenloft turned up to 11. You know, it is still dark and horrible, but in a dark fantasy kind of way. Where, you know, Barovia is definitely much more of that sort of Transylvanian, Carpathian, you know, fog swept mountain sides and all that kind of, like, cool, lightning bolts, on craggy peaks and all that kind of, gothic horror is, sort of the flavor that Ravenloft was originally trying to encapsulate. And the idea of this adventure is, for whatever reason, at least, the original Curse of Strahd was that Strahd, for whatever, he can choose who comes and goes, which usually means nobody, but he can. He has drawn your player characters into Barovia for, the reason is dependent on the cards that were drawn, but for whatever reason, he could have done that. Now, like down the line, it seems that it's more the whims of the Dark Powers who decides who comes and goes into Ravenloft. And like at times, they may even be introducing great foes to people like Strahd, either to keep him sharp, perhaps, or maybe it's time for a new Dark Lord, which seems to be what happens in other domains outside of Barovia. And even some domains at times were either taken over by a new Dark Lord or absorbed into a new territory, all kinds of different ways that it could change hands. But like, if it could ever torment the person stuck inside, then yeah, that's ends up being what it was. For like, just another quick aside, like Vlad Falkov, I think, of the land of Falkovnia, is sort of a Vlad the Impaler character who's not a vampire, and he wants to conquer everywhere around him, but he can't, because he can't expand his domain because the Dark Powers won't let him, and so he's constantly trying to invade Darkon and getting thrown back, or whatever. It's just stuff like that. It's like, it's a one big, black sandbox in a way. And sometimes your characters are there to, well, who knows why? We'll never really know why. And so like, and there's other things too, is like the Dark Powers are the law, are the land, and the rules of the rest of the Dungeons and Dragons universe do not apply in Ravenloft, to the point where even your own gods, your clerics' gods, cannot reach you. And so there is, although their spells still get granted, so it's this ever like, where's that magic come from?
Yeah.
Who's granting these spells and why? And why is the magic changing? And that's another big element of Ravenloft that I don't know if they talk about that a lot in 5e Curse of Strahd, how magic has changed?
Yeah. There's actually a whole list of sample spells, and what their a visual effect, how it changes when you come into Ravenloft, and then also other spells that stop functioning. And I'd have to check again. It's been a little while since I've looked, but because I know like one thing about Ravenloft is that you cannot detect good or evil.
Right.
You can only detect law, chaos, and neutrality. So like the spell, the old 2nd edition spell, Detect Evil, wasn't really a good name for that spell, because it could detect basically it was detect alignment.
Right.
Yeah. So when you cast that spell, it only indicates whether someone is lawful or chaotic or neutral in terms of that side of the spectrum. So and I can't recall if that's the same case in 5e, but that's the way I play it. I mean, I decided when my characters came into Barovia that there are certain spells that just would not function.
Yeah, well, detect alignment just takes away from a lot. If you can just like, I'll cast a spell and find out that, that guy's actually evil, he must be the vampire. It takes away, all the rest of it. And that's the whole point of Ravenloft, is like, there should always be unanswered questions and these inscrutable mysteries that you'll never truly solve. And even Strahd, for all his paunts and circumstance, he thinks he understands the land, but only kinda. And he has probably come to some very wrong-headed conclusions about, the whats and whys and wherefores of what's going on in his life,
Yeah, so just here, referring to the section on alterations of magic in Curse of Strahd on page 24, in case you want to look yourself. I don't see anything about whether detect alignment or detecting good or evil functions. So it seems like they nixed that, but that'll be the first redux we do. The first redux we do with Curse of Strahd is that you should not be able to detect whether somebody is good or evil. That is one of the core aspects of the horror of the Domains of Dread and Curse of Strahd, which is your inability to understand the nature of what is around you. It's part of the creeping dread that seeps into the land and should be seeping into your character's uncertainty about their place in Barovia. So I would nix that right off the bat. And I would go so far as to say, like, even all the way back to second edition, just detect linemen in general should not function. If you cannot astrally project yourself out of even with so this is the thing, like, once you're in Barovia, once you're in the mists, you've been taken, you cannot get out by any magic means. Even a wish does not work. So wish, astral projection, banishment, all of these spells that put you into a different plane of existence cease to function. So for the way that I would kind of explain this is that in Dungeons and Dragons, your alignment is inextricably related to, or connected to your connection to your god and the divine entity that kind of governs your life and will govern your afterlife. Because, if you throw a god out for me, Rob,
Tyr, lawful good.
Tyr. So, if you hope to go and live in the outer planes after death with your god Tyr, god of justice, then you have to lead a lawful good life. And after you die, you will go. Kelemvor, if you're Forgotten Realms, Kelemvor will come for you and take you down the River Styx, and then take you to the Gate of Keys, and there you will wait in what is ostensibly a little purgatory. And the closer that you lived your life to the alignment of your god and to the tenets of your god, the sooner that Torm will send one of his proxies for you and take you off to his land in the Outer Realms. So because of that, your alignment is a divine aspect of your character, the way that I see it. So because the mists disconnect you from your god, and your connection is replaced by a lie from the dark powers, then there should be no way to access information concerning your alignment either.
Well, that's one of the most compelling aspects of it, is that, you're a cleric, right? You're supposed to be lawful good, and kind of no matter what you do, you still get your spells when you pray for them. Your god isn't like, helicoptering over your behavior anymore. And so you might go further and further and further off the track. You might believe that you're lawful good, but you start doing some pretty neutral or even maybe evil stuff, quote unquote, to like survive the terrors of Ravenloft. That's one of the great compelling aspects of it, is that you're never supposed to feel safe.
No, and another thing that we're just going to tell you, like, we are going to bring back, that for some reason I do not understand the reasoning behind this. Powers checks were taken out of 5th edition, and this is the thing that kind of sticks in my craw more than anything else. It's really the only thing that truly sticks in my craw, which is in the older edition. So it wasn't there in the original module, and maybe that's their reasoning, is because it wasn't in the original. We're not going to put it in, but there's all this other extra content. So why didn't you just keep it to what the original was? Because we'll get into like the differences here pretty soon. But the powers checks I think starting with Realm of Terror, they introduced power check. And so anytime you do an evil act, or you cast an evil spell, like a necromancy spell, you have to make a powers check. Now, this is a very minuscule chance that you're going to be noticed by the dark powers, but the idea is that there is an off chance that if you do something horrible, or you cast an intrinsically evil spell, that the dark powers will, like Sauron, at the top of his tower, they will turn and they will notice you. And when they notice you, ooh, that's not good. And if you fail, then you get affected. And you can end up with some horrible deformation. I think one of my player characters ended up with like crocodilian, like tough skin. You can end up with like vampiric aspect. Your eyes can become cat's eyes, but you can get like powers too with it. I mean,
right. There's supposed to be both a blessing and a curse, and it's in a way it's supposed to tempt your player into doing more wrong.
Yeah,
you know, because there are, like, for instance, I actually have the page here, table 8, page 52, failed power check result. You'd roll a die 6. You know, stage 1 are minor things like grows small fangs but has putrid breath, all the way to stage 4, where, you know, tongue becomes forked and injects type F poison, but you have a -4 to your charisma. Or no animal can stand being within 25 feet of you. You know, stuff like that, where it starts to really, you know, that's a blessing and a curse. You know.
So, and actually, perhaps the first thing we'll do between now and our next episode for our downloadable content on our Patreon page for our top tier supporters is create a updated 5e version of the power checks table. Because I already started kind of fiddling with that in my game.
Cool.
But the other thing to keep in mind is that every time you fail a powers check, you get deeper in the hole, until you utterly lose yourself, and theoretically
you lose control of your character.
You lose control of your character. Anyway. And yeah, I mean, I know that like in this day and age, people don't like that kind of stink fingery thing. People don't like, but these are choices your character made. So if you're making bad choices, you're bringing it on yourself. So that might be the first thing that we create is the updated powers check rules for 5th edition, and bring that stuff back, because it's a great aspect of the game that really brings you into the full terror, I guess, so to speak, of what the domains of dread represent. That slippery slope of loss of your humanity and loss of your character, both literally and intellectually.
Yeah, and it depends on your GM. I mean, just because you turn evil, I'm like, well, now we're just telling a different kind of story. There's different ways to do it. Ravenloft was built on the idea was that, generally speaking, the things that are around you are adversarial. And while there may be, you know, diamonds in the rough and heroes that may not look like heroes, quote unquote, on the surface, you know, gruff, you know, men like Rudolph Van Richten he's supposed to be very abrasive or whatever, you know, while he's still, you know, Ravenloft's greatest monster hunter, you know, that kind of stuff is like, there's just more to the powers checks, and specifically, I think, where like, because it does take sort of, I don't know, it's a little preachy, maybe, is because it, like, you have to make rolls depending on which version it is, I think, but you had to make rolls based on whether you were doing it against an evil person, or whether you were doing it against a good person or neutral person, or whether you're doing to like a good person or a friend or an ally, something like that. Like they had larger % chances of being noticed or whatever, you know. And it's an interesting way to think about that, is like, because the dark powers, are they encouraging this behavior, or are they punishing this behavior, or is it, in a way, is it both, you know? And to what end?
My theory of the dark powers, and this is why we talk about the Cthulhu mythos, A, because we both love Lovecraft, and but B, the dark powers were created in 2nd edition after the Cthulhu mythos was stripped from Dungeons and Dragons. And we talked a little bit about this in our announcement, but Arkham House, which was August Derleth's company that he fraudulently created and then claimed ownership of the Lovecraft content, the copyright ownership, because of some bullshit letter that he claimed to possess. He threatened to sue TSR because not the Fiend Folio, but what was it? The Gods and Pantheons book from 1st edition had the whole Cthulhu mythos in it. And so instead of forking up the money for a big long drawn out legal battle, they just decided to say, fuck it. And we're not going to include that in future editions. And so they extricated all of that. And now in 5th edition, it's back. And I mean, they haven't really done much with it yet.
Right.
Sandy Peterson, and I totally missed out on it. Sandy Peterson created a 5th edition supplement that is all Cthulhu Mythos stuff. So, and it was a Kickstarter. So hopefully, like, once it gets to the Kickstarter, it'll be available for sale and stuff normally. But at any rate, so my theory has always been that the Dark Powers are just the word that TSR came up with for the Cthulhu Mythos, and that the Cthulhu Mythos has been stripped from Dungeons and Dragons. And so now we have Ravenloft, and the Dark Powers are using the Cthulhu Mythos, that they are gone from the multiverse, but it's in Ravenloft where they linger. Mm-hmm. You know, like Cthulhu, you know, dead Cthulhu lies dreaming. The Dark Powers lie dreaming, and it's just in their the very nature of them have created the domains of dread, and it's where they feed off of the dark energy created by the worst of the multiverse. These are the most evil individuals in the entire world of Dungeons and Dragons. And so they feed off, it's a prison they've created so they can feed off of their evil and somehow linger in this eternal torpor until now they come back in 5th edition. And we start to expand and open up the world and whatever. So, I mean, that's just my head canon, obviously. Who knows if anyone at TSR even ever considered that idea, but it fits. And I think I like it. And it's not something you ever have to tell to your players, because you want the Dark Powers to always remain a mystery and something unknown and unknowable. Again, Cthulian. So where was I going with that? I just went on a rant, and I don't know the point I was getting to.
I think we were talking about we had gotten here through power checks. So I think the idea is that, you know, you see sort of evidence of something similar in Lovecraft's work. You know, Innsmouth is a whole town of people who failed their powers checks and are turning into frogmen or whatever. Like, that's a way to think about it, right? Dark blessings, dark gifts, dark rewards, especially for ancient or intense betrayals of family and kin, like Strahd, for instance.
Which is a good segue. We should kind of let's do a little overview of the story of Strahd himself. Okay. And then we can move on. You want to start? I guess I could start because you did the last kind of overview of the domains. So, if you're not familiar, Strahd was a noble. He's not actually from the land of Barovia. He's from another place that bordered Barovia that we never learned the name of. And not only that, but Barovia itself, before it was drawn into the domains of dread, is from a world that no one has ever been able to track down or learn the name of or anything. The only thing that we know for sure is that before being drawn into the domains of dread, Strahd was in this long drawn out war with this group of individuals called the Turgs. So this leads to one of my theories about, you know, where Barovia was really from, which I'll reveal after we get through the basic story of Strahd. So Strahd's in this big battle, or in this big war that's drawn out. He's a noble. He's sort of this cruel, distant, aloof kind of ruler. He invades Barovia, and at some point during all of this, his brother, his younger brother, quite substantially younger than him, Sergei Zarovich, falls in love with this peasant girl named Tatiana. And Tatiana is, you know, this is kind of a classic. I don't know if this kind of story you could really create from whole cloth nowadays. It would need some more. It would need some more depth to it. But Tatiana is the most beautiful woman in the realm, and Tatiana falls in love with Sergei, but Strahd falls in love with Tatiana. And so one thing leads to another. Strahd or Sergei and Tatiana become betrothed, and Strahd's jealousy grows and grows. because he wants Tatiana, and he's trying to prove over and over again that he is the right man for her and not Sergei. And everything he does just makes Tatiana hate him more. And so finally he decides that he ends up making a pact. Like he discovers or gets contact with the dark powers. Dark powers offer him basically the answer to his dreams. And they basically, he makes a deal with them that he will have Tatiana and they will be together for all time. Like the way that it's worded, it's very much a devil's contract.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is that the dark powers have kind of enticed him into a raw deal where Strahd kills Sergei, and he thinks that once he kills Sergei and he gets him out of the way, that Tatiana will go for him. But then, of course, Tatiana can't handle any of this. And so she ends up throwing herself off the walls of Castle Ravenloft to 1,000 feet down to the ravine below. Her body is never found. And then all of Strahd's household guards, the guards in Castle Ravenloft, turn on him, to kill the murderer that he has become. And when they strike him down, he is resurrected as Vampire Strahd. And then ultimately, the great irony of his deal with dark powers is that Tatiana will be forever reincarnated, in new forms, but always looking almost exactly the same as she originally was. And so she will always be in Barovia. He will always be in Barovia. So technically, they will always be together, but they will never be. But Strahd will never be able to have her. And so throughout the years, throughout the history, she continually comes back, and Strahd continually pursues her. And that's kind of the basic. I don't know if you have anything to add, any like more subtler details.
I mean, that's the broad strokes of it. I mean, he basically, the idea, like Strahd is supposed to be a military tactician genius, right? He's supposed to be like super smart, but also like cruel. He blames his military history on turning his heart cold or whatever. But basically the idea is like, he's a cruel tyrant who carved out, a kingdom, had his family come live there, became jealous of his younger brother because he had youth and vigor and joy, and he had Tatiana, and Strahd had squandered his youth on these military campaigns that he had done for his family's sake or against the Turks or whatever he, ultimately, like, it seems like Strahd was probably, he didn't need all that much encouraging to go to war in the first place or whatever, I think that there's probably an element of him that's very self-deluded. That would have to be, right? Even though he is a genius or whatever, or supposed to be a genius. And but the idea, at least the original idea of Strahd, the Strahd character, was that he was the perfect puppet master, the perfect villain that the DM was supposed to run as if it was his own player character against everyone else. It was back when, in the first edition, where it was a much more adversarial relationship between or that was encouraged between player and GM, you know what I mean? And so you were supposed to do whatever it took to make sure that Strahd didn't get killed and that they didn't get to leave Ravenloft, right? But if they did it, good for them. They get out, right, or whatever. But Strahd was just too good to let it be, to end there, which is where Ravenloft comes from, but he just needed neighbors. So they needed other dark people who some, may have been descended from people who were Barovians in the first place. Others had been drawn in from, Orth or the Forgotten Realms or wherever else to fill out the rest of it. But Strahd remains ever the center. Like, that's why it's called Ravenloft. It's named after his castle. It's that kind of thing. And so he must always, and he is the classic vampire. He is the Dracula. He fills that role. And not only that, like he hits a lot of those same beats that we want from, this, super powerful, necromancer vampire general king dude, or well, you know, he's a count, but there's nobody higher than him, so
yeah,
you know that title doesn't mean anything.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I mean, I think one of the things that we're going to end up doing with like something to understand about Ravenloft, and I think this may be something that was never fully considered like deeply.
What's that?
Is all of these Dark Lords, Strahd especially, are, like I said before, the most evil individuals in the multiverse. And I don't quite think that they are written as evil as they should be.
I agree. Absolutely.
Because, like, sure, I mean, we don't really know what Strahd did before coming to Barovia. We don't know the atrocities that he committed in his wars. So we assume that they are on the level of you know, Vlad the Impaler, that he did incredibly brutal things in his quest for power and conquest.
Mm-hmm.
But now that he's in Barovia, the worst thing he's done is, you know, like commit what's the term for killing a sibling?
Fratricide? No.
Fratricide, yeah, fratricide, I think is the term.
That's father, isn't that father? Or that's patricide.
No, that's patricide.
Yeah, right.
So he's committed fratricide and in an attempt to take his brother's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I mean, like that. So right now, as I talk, probably somebody in the world has just done that. It happens all of the time.
Right.
It's not what I would consider the height of evilness. I mean, when I think of like true evil, like the kind of evil that transcends any aspect of humanity, that removes all humanity, I think of people like Goebbels or Ted Bundy or you know, true sociopaths, true psychopaths.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that Strahd is written currently, he's just kind of like a brooding man up in a castle who fucks with player characters when they show up,
right,
for his own amusement. And it's like, you know, like that happens. Like, I like the game that I've been running. The place that, like, it was funny. The last session we had, where I was really trying to ramp up the notion that Strahd is really evil, and that the people of Barovia perceive him as this terrible poison on the land.
The devil Strahd.
The devil Strahd. They immediately started like coming back, and they're all like talking in character, like you have no idea where we just came from. Like, you have no idea. like where we, like the shit that we have seen. Like this is play school, you know, like compared to where I came from. And so like, and it's true. Like it's not, I mean, it's like the worst thing about Barovia is that you can't get out. And so it's an incredibly insular community that has a lot of monsters running around. And so it's dangerous, but it's not insidious. It's not insidious enough.
Right.
So, so like for my part, I plan to really ramp that up, and we should, like, as we go forward, really flesh out like the true crimes of this individual and what makes him the monster of legend and myth, more than just the fact that he sucks blood every once.
Right. He's and just all vampire, like, you know.
Yeah, he's like a powerful vampire, and you know, he's got a big old mean castle, and you know, it's I think the Tomb of Horrors is probably, you know, more insidious than Castle Ravenloft, and the Lich, you know, in Tomb of Horrors is certainly a more insidious character. I'm thinking, why doesn't he have a domain of dread?
Right. Well, maybe he's on the short list. You never know.
He's on the short list. But so, I mean, that's one thing that we'll end up talking about, is really getting into some darkness with that particular character, so that you can really build up that sense of dread. Like my players, I was getting ready to introduce something that Strahd does periodically on the regular in Barovia at the end of my last session, and the player characters decided to take action rather than observe, and so they haven't gotten to see what exactly Strahd was getting ready to do. And it'll happen, but we just ended up in a big knockdown, drag-out fight with some of Strahd's minions who were trying to set up a really terrible thing. And this was taken one of the things I'll throughout this series, I'll kind of link out to and bring up, especially podcasts that I think will be good listening, which deal with ideas of horror and ideas of the darker side of humanity. And one of those that I'll say right now is that, Strahd and another character in Curse of Strahd, the Abbot, I am thinking back to there was a recent series on I don't think it was Goebbels. It was who was the other dude? The Nazi doctor. Goebbels was the propaganda minister, and then there was
Mengele.
Mengele, yeah, they did a 3-part. There was a podcast from it was Last Podcast on the Left, and they did a 3-part intensive series on Mengele. So I see the Abbot in Curse of Strahd as Mengele, and I see Strahd as Goebbels, or maybe a combination of Mengele, Goebbels, and Hitler together. I mean, you have to think that Strahd is the first. Strahd technically should be the most evil in all of existence.
Well, right. And I think Strahd fills the dictator role, which actually in an interesting way that also makes Azalin, the Lich, who will eventually be a Lich King in his own right, more like Himmler, the dark occultist. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So we'll add those because that's all good content to kind of get you in the mindset of Strahd. I think you kind of have to go to a dark place to portray him properly. Like he can't just be a guy who just shows up and get them, my pretties, like that kind of thing. It has to be something
Saturday morning cartoony kind of.
Yeah, every moment your characters are out and abroad in Barovia should be a moment should fill them with uncertainty and dread, because they should never know it's something horrible. Either they're going to encounter something horrible or they're going to be the victims of something horrible. So I don't know if you had anything else to add. I think we could move on to.
No, that sounds good. I mean, yeah, we'll obviously be revisiting Strahd quite a few times. So
yeah. So I won't, because dates and shit can be tedious. I won't spend too much time on the history of Ravenloft as a setting, but the original book was written by Tracy and Laura Hickman. Wait, is that? Why am I? Oh, never mind. Yeah, Tracy. I don't know why my brain just told me I was wrong, but no, Tracy and Laura Hickman, who are, like I said in yesterday's video, Dungeons and Dragons royalty, and in my opinion, they've created outside of Drizzt Do'Urden or Elminster, they have managed to create probably had the most compelling character in the history of the game. So they created Ravenloft. The first module came out in 1983, and it was so popular, it became like an instant hit. And then in 86, they released the sequel, House on Griffin Hill. And then, oddly enough, it wasn't, as popular as Ravenloft had become just from these two modules, it wasn't until 1990 that they finally created the box set, the Realm of Terror. And in Realm of Terror, so here's some interesting little trivia. In the original module, the Vistani were just known as gypsies.
Right.
Yes, I know that I think gypsy is now a derogatory term, and the correct term is Roma, but just the idea of the gypsy, the wandering kind of mystic in caravans, that kind of thing. They were just known as gypsies, and the Tarokka deck had not yet been dubbed the Tarokka deck. It was just known as the Fortunes of Ravenloft. And it was a card reading, much like the tarot deck. And there it is. And all of the names, like the different types of cards and stuff that are in the Tarokka deck now, did not exist. You were just told to use a deck of playing cards and remove these specific cards from it, and that'll get you down to where you need to be. And then it would, and then basically what it would do is it would tell you, the Tarokka deck would tell you where the magic items were inside of Barovia that you needed to find in order to defeat Strahd. But what it also did, and I guess we could have waited to do this kind of survey once you start talking about, why don't we do that? We'll get back to this. Let me move on. When Rob starts to talk about the Tarokka deck, we can do a little overview of the history of the Tarokka deck and kind of what it is and stuff and how it's kind of developed over the years. But like I said, so the term Tarokka deck did not come about until the the second publication of the Ravenloft module, which was called House of Strahd, which came out in '93. So in House of Strahd, which was basically just this module updated for second edition, that's where they coined the term Tarokka deck. And then so then the next iteration of the original module, because there have been 4 over the years. There was this. House of Strahd came out, like I said, in 93. Then with third edition, they ended up publishing Expeditions to Castle Ravenloft, which came out in 2006. And this one made substantial changes to the original module. They expanded the realm of Barovia that was playable in the module. In the original one, all you get to explore is the village of Barovia and the road, ostensibly, basically, that leads up to Castle Ravenloft. And in that, you get sort of some of the original place settings from the village of Barovia, like the Blood of the Vine and the church. And you get Sir Falls on the way up to Castle Ravenloft, and then you get Madame Eva's tent, where you get your card reading done, and then that tells you where it is. But here, I'll just open up to the map too, because you can see how significantly smaller of an area you got to play within. So there it is.
Right.
There's the village of Barovia. There's the village of Barovia. There's Castle Ravenloft, and then you've got the road that leads up there. That's it. That's all you get. Which is, if we look at the map now, everything I just showed you is right here. That's the area. So, right there. So now all of this other stuff is added into it. And with the third edition version of Expedition to Castle Ravenloft, this is about like half the size of that. So this one expands out, and I think it introduces Baba Lysaga. It introduces the village of Kresk and Vallaki. A lot of this, what's in here, is expanded out from Realm of Terror, Domains of Dread, all of that stuff, because in those books is where they started to expand and flush out the entire country, so to speak, or county of
right.
Barovia. So the other thing that they did in here, which I wholeheartedly agreed with, is they got rid of all of the puns from Ravenloft. And we haven't talked about this yet, but this mainly shows up in the crypt in Castle Ravenloft, where there's like 40 different crypts, and all of them have different, historical figures in them. Some of them have histories, some of them don't. But in the original module, there wasn't a whole lot of content about who these people inside the crypts were. Some of the names, may harken back to something or other, and some of the crypts had a little bit of history with them, but most of them had nothing.
Yeah,
but
they were throwaway lines mostly.
They were throwaway lines, and they were puns. So, like, for instance, let's find some of the good ones. Some of them were not really great puns. Like in Crypt number 2, It was the tomb of the court ceiling painter. His name was Artista de Slop. And I'm sorry, Tracy and Laura Hickman, but why in a game that is supposed to be horrific and dreadful do you make dumb jokes? I don't get it. So in 3rd edition, for example, they changed her name to Arica Dinescu, and they gave you a little bit of history too with it. That's one of the things I love about the 3rd edition Castle Expedition to Castle Ravenloft, is that they gave you a research section. Basically, it was a block of descriptive text that you could access if you did research on that individual, and so that was all discoverable information about the individual within that tomb, and some of those individuals relate to other story aspects within the world. And I loved it because, like, as a sandbox, it's a great resource for the DM to like take characters that they thought were interesting. So, like, for instance, with Arica, her inscription says, beloved of Dragomir, and it made some other changes and whatever, but basically you get some history, and then it tells you who Dragomir is and what his deal was, and you could connect it out to locations in the world if you wanted to. You could build those stories up, create more content, whatever you want to do. So I thought it was a great way to do it. Here's the one that I just hate the worst. In crypt number 3, and it took me a while. Like, I had to say this out loud before I got it. The person who was buried here was a antique dealer. Okay, and it says that. The name is Lady Isolde Junk. Okay, and as soon as I said it, I remember talking to Rob about this, and as soon as I said it out loud, I was like, of course, Lady Isolde Junk. Isolde Junk. And it even says, like, that her crypt is filled with antiques that are all, like, not worth anything. And I'm just like, come on, guys. And so, like, they, again, in 3rd edition, they changed her to Lady Yolanda Ionescu. And I was like, great, it's a real person now. It's not just a joke. So this is one thing that I know, I understand the reasoning in Curse of Strahd for them returning to the original, and they did for the most part. For the most part, all of those crypts went back to the original puns and dumb jokes, but not all of them. Some of them are completely different. Some of them were taken from, and some of them are similar to the 3rd edition one. And I'm like, and so I don't understand the reasoning behind making some of them return to the original and keeping some from 3rd edition. I don't get it. So that's going to be another Redux we probably do, which is referencing heavily the 3rd edition names within the crypt, because it creates real compelling characters that you can seed into the history of the world and develop stories around, that you can connect threads with and all kinds of stuff, rather than it just being a joke. And as far as I'm concerned, like, in Ravenloft, the jokes should just be at the table when you're trying to lighten the mood. They shouldn't be in the content itself. Should be no jokes in the world of Ravenloft.
No, it undoes everything that you've been doing. You're, especially if, like, the way that place is described, it's very claustrophobic with, like, knee-high mist, and there's friggin' vampire spawn everywhere, and, like, wights and specters and all kinds of stuff that can leap out of the darkness. And if we're gonna get a cheap laugh off of what was that, the Daedalus one, Aerial Deployment, or whatever,
Aerial
like,
Deployment.
yeah, right. You know, dumb.
There's an Icarus guy who tried to create wings and he failed, and his name was Aerial Deployment. And it's like, so what? These people's parents gave them stupid pun names, and then the fates made them act out a life based on their pun name. It's just absurd. So I mean, that's the one thing where, like, I just ugh. Oh,
I mean, we get it. Maybe if they were strapped for time and they had a publication date to hit, and they had a bunch of, like, filler names they needed to come up with. But in 5th edition, guys, yeah, we're a little disappointed.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you know,
And I
and
said earlier that the only thing that stuck in my craw was the lack of powers, and I forgot about this. This trumps the lack of power checks. Like, I just think that should have been stricken from the record. Like, once they made that change in third edition, they should have never gone back. So, and you might disagree. I don't care. So this is how we're playing it, and you know, you can take that or leave it if you want to keep it the way it was because of nostalgia. That's fine, but I just don't think it belongs in it lessens the. I know it's hard to build a real sense of horror and dread in a role playing game, but spiritually it should be there. Thematically it should be there, and it shouldn't be, you know, Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah, you've got enough working against you to begin with to set mood and tone and try to get some, you know, real scares, or at least, you know, that uneasiness that you know, the looming dread, the coming chaos or whatever, and like nothing will take you out of it as something just sort of lazy, like that. So we demand a little more seriousness from our own games. We demand a little more seriousness from our players. And so, you know, and I think that's something that you can expect from us, is that, well, you know, we have a sense of humor about it, whatever. We'll make some jokes. At the end of the day, what would go in canon would not be the pun. It would be, you know, the one with this Dragomir guy with his huge backstory, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that's interesting in here, let me see if I can find my note card on that one, is in 5th edition, they add this whole story about the abbot in the village of Kresk. There's this abbey. It's the Abbey of St. Markovia. Now, St. Markovia, there was a woman in the crypts who is basically this person, who becomes this person. And her name, I should have had this ready to go beforehand. Sorry. Let's find it here. Almost. Bear with me.
There's a lot of people buried in Castle Ravenloft.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. And I probably already filed past her. Hold on a second. Come on. Where are you? Sorry. This is what you get on a raw feed. This kind of thing. Artemis. Nope. What the hell? Come on, where are you? Son of a bitch. I will go into Ravenloft voice now and say son of a bitch. Here we go. Okay. Crypt number 7. And I believe her counterpart was crypt number 6, or it might be crypt number 6. Okay. Oh yeah.
Yep. Here it is. Yep. I found it too.
Crypt number 6. So her name was Maria Markovia, and the original inscription on that tomb read, "Great was her beauty, undone by a jealous hand." Now, here's the thing. It says that this is illegible because it's been clawed off. So why even have it? Like, how are you, like, what's the point of having that information if you can't
do anything with
players or do anything with it? So I think that's dumb. Or I just don't know if it was.
Well, they mentioned that. Well, they do. They mentioned the dude who this Endorovich dude, Endorovich the Terrible.
Yeah,
that man loved Marya, see Crypt 6, and found that she loved someone else in his court. Yeah, he poisoned them or something, right?
Yeah.
So like, but so what? Like, none of that matters. You know, there's nothing to do with it.
Yeah, like, so that's the basic story. Is in the original one, Maria Markovia was this beautiful woman, and it was basically the same story as the Strahd Sergei Tatiana story, but with lesser nobles. And so Indirovich falls in love with Maria Markovia, wants her, but Markovia is betrothed to somebody else, and it ends up being this like poisoning thing, and she's the one who drinks it, so she dies, and then Indirovich has the dude arrested for murder, and then they kill him and whatever. So, which is an interest that's fine. It's an interesting story. It stayed completely the same in 2nd edition, and then in 3rd edition, it changed, and they separated these two characters. Now, I don't understand why they separated them. I think it was just because they didn't want to take the time to try to make the story work, because I think you can. And the idea here is that now in 3rd edition, she is Saint Markovia. And then this is the origin for the Abbey of Saint Markovia in Kresk. And her inscription was changed to "Great was her might, undone by a jealous hand." And I think that's good. Like I'm not a fan of the old my brain just shut down. I'm not a big fan of the old like damsel in distress kind of thing, where the female characters are weak and they need a man to somehow to make the story function. So I like that they made her this strong individual, but I don't understand why they had to take her away from Indirovich, because now in 3rd edition they've given her first name Maria to just a random unknown woman. And so that original story between Maria Markovia and Indirovich the Terrible is now a story that's separated, and it's between him and some anonymous Maria. And Saint Markovia becomes her own thing, and she's the one, the story goes, she was a cleric, and she established the Abbey of Saint Markovia as a hospital in Kresk, and her entire purpose was to destroy Strahd. And so eventually she creates or puts together this assault force and goes to Castle Ravenloft to take on Strahd, and she ends up getting killed by Strahd. And then he buries her in the crypt as like an insult to her. And after that, Strahd takes his fury out on the monks and nuns that are left in the Abbey of Saint Markovia, and drives them all mad and starves them to the point where they start committing cannibalism and murder against each other, and everybody goes mad. And in that's basically the story of the 5th edition story of this abbey. And over a couple centuries, the abbey itself just becomes this sort of like forgotten, haunted place where no one goes. And then the abbot shows up, just this random dude from nowhere, and claiming that he's come to honor her memory. And that's what it says in Curse of Strahd. And I think like this is one of the things that we're going to retcon, or we're going to redux somewhat heavily. I mean, the core elements will stay the same, but we're going to add some twists and add some density to who the abbot is and why he's there. But the abbot comes, reestablishes the Abbey of Saint Markovia, and with the intent to destroy Strahd, but Strahd starts working his power against the abbot and turning the abbot into sort of this island of Dr. Moreau dude, and turning him insane. So, and we'll get more into that as we go along, but that
is actually referenced to, again, a lot of the 2nd edition stuff. Like, actually, if you look over here, the island of Markovia actually used to be connected to the land of Barovia, but then after the Grand Conjunction, which is a whole other thing, it winded up being this sort of like lonely island where it was a very island of Dr. Moreau kind of experience. Although it wasn't this abbot, it was this totally other, I'd have to look it up, but a totally different character too.
Yeah, it was.
That got reduxed, and I think we could think about, I like the Markovia, and when it gets used, it's great that Strahd had a villain. And while, he might have interred her as an insult, perhaps there was an air of respect he had for her too, as opposed to just turning her into another of his vampire brides or something like that,
Yeah. So, and I think that's one of the little kernels that I think suggests that the Domains of Dread might be coming. Is that they are like plucking ideas from the Domains of Dread and trying to sort of rework them and plug them into Curse of Strahd. And perhaps the intent is that when they expand the universe, then the abbot will become the Dark Lord of Markovia, and they'll just have to kind of redux and change like who exactly that character was. But he definitely does. I mean, it's the pieces are there. The name, it's in the names. So so I don't know, unless they were just like, I kind of like this idea. Let's pluck it and take it. We'll take a name. That'll be like a little callback to that, and whatever. So hopefully it's not just something that's throwaway and there's intention behind it. But we'll have to wait to see. So anyway, moving on. The last few things I was just going to talk about in terms of the history of the publication is the actual campaign setting itself. So like I said before, in 1990 they released the box set that was the Realm of Terror. And that was the first time that they expanded the world of Ravenloft and added all the new domains. And then they did a revision of that in '94. That first box set was popularly known as the Black Box. And then the revised edition of Realm of Terror became known as the Red Box. I think that's the one that you have, Rob. So, and then that one, like the difference between the two, like I said, the term Tarokka is now incorporated because House of Strahd was published between those two sets. And so that gets folded in. And then the other one is they basically just expand the content. So in the first box set, you got 140-page book that covered everything. In the second one, you get two big softcover books that really dramatically expands everything.
Plus your own deck of Tarokka cards, which was cool.
Yeah. Now the one thing I like about the original box set is it had all of these like cardstock, like 11 by 8.5 images of like different noble families, like full color with their own personal Ravenlofts from the different domains. So you have Castle Ravenloft, but in Darkon, Azalin has Avernus. So I think there was a image of Avernus Castle. There's all of these really cool, art that comes, these little handouts that you can show to your players, like this is the such and such family, and this is their home, and so those are really cool things. But again, you can get this stuff on Drive-Thru RPG. I think it's all fun, valuable stuff to have. Because you can loot. I mean, basically the idea is what we're doing is we're looting from the history of the setting to cobble together what we think is sort of the best of everything in our hubris. So, but then, okay, so then, second edition released 3 versions of the setting. So then the final version that came out in '97 was the Domain of Dread hardcover that I have here. And then 4th edition pretty much back up. 3rd edition comes along. And that's when D20, the open source thing started. And so I guess WotC at the time had no interest in developing Ravenloft as a setting for 3rd edition. So they opened it up for license, and White Wolf, the publishers of Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf Apocalypse and all that, they bought the license and they published through their imprint Sword and Sorcery the 3rd edition books.
This book right here, which I have.
Yeah, that's the 3rd edition.
Pretty good. It's pretty good.
That's the 3rd edition, and then they did and that was in 2001 and 2003. They did an updated version for 3.5. Which was just a player's handbook. Now, we are not really going to be using those books.
Not primarily, certainly, anyway.
Because the big problem with those 2 volumes is that because White Wolf only had the license for the Ravenloft content, they had to alter everything that was anything from other D&D sources. The same way that, Sony could never use non-X-Men characters, and the whoever Marvel or Disney whatever couldn't use the X-Men universe stuff. It was the same thing. So they had to like nix Vecna from it, nix Cass from it, nix all of these Dark Lords. They had to change the names of gods. They couldn't use Bane or Ilmater or any of that stuff. They had to change those names. And so they had to do a lot of reworking of the setting, and they basically created it in something that's entirely new and different. and doesn't quite fit into the well, I guess the quote unquote timeline of Ravenloft.
There's some stuff we could steal from, but yeah, it's not a Dungeons and Dragons setting. It's a D20 setting, which is it was subtly different, and in a couple of important ways, very different. Especially the way that we talk about this stuff.
Yeah. And so then, interestingly, the rights for Ravenloft reverted in 2006, I believe, and then I think this came out. When did this come out? This came out 2006. So I think it was either 2006, 2005, somewhere around there. The rights reverted back to WotC, and they published this. And this, even though this is 3rd edition or 3.5, this in no way, shape, or form is connected to those books. The one that Rob just showed you, nothing to do with this. So you can't use, I mean, I guess you can, but you can't technically use those to run this.
They don't shuffle well.
Yeah. So that's just that's why we're really not going to be looking at those or using those. I don't even own copies of them. I might grab one of the PDFs just to kind of see how they made changes, because it's interesting historically. But
yeah, so, I actually didn't buy the Sword and Sorcery one. I got that as a comp back when I worked at Diamond.
Yeah. And so then the last thing, in 1994 is when they released Mask of the Red Death.
Right.
And that introduced the Gothic Earth setting, but they only ever released three pieces of content for that. There was this, and then there was the Gothic Earth Gazetteer, and then there was the Guide to Transylvania.
Right.
And then there were some other ones, I think, like we were talking before, like Bleak House, which is an adventure that's centered around Van Richten, I think in his old age. It is something that you can adapt for
you could loosely adapt it. I mean, technically, if you're playing that right, it's all tied to Van Richten's story, like really tied to Van Richten's story. And by extension, then it needs to be set in Darkon, which is where he's supposed to be from.
Anyway, no, actually, he's not from Darkon. Van Richten is from Mordenshire.
Right. He's from Mordenshire,
right. Which is the setting of the sequel to Ravenloft.
So that's actually interesting because that fits in with the whole Darkons. Basically, Darkon is one of the examples of Ravenloft kind of gone nuts, where it's clear that parts of this world are fabrications of something, where it's got all this false history. And after you've lived in the land of Darkon for a few months, suddenly your memories of your old life disappear and an entirely new life and memories like come into being. And that's all tied into like the Book of Names, which is in Castle Avernus, which is Zalen's castle and all this kind of other stuff. Yeah. But chances are that then what that means is the entire Bleak House is a fabrication too, fabricated for Van Richten, to tie all that together. It's creepy and weird, but you can use elements of that to really like make it fun,
Yeah. So it's interesting too. There's, I won't get into now. We can talk about this more when we get to House on Griffin Hill, but there are quite a few Dark Lords that come from Mordenshire, and like not directly Dark Lords, but like ancestors or descendants of individuals in House on Griffin Hill become Dark Lords.
Right.
So Mordenshire is like, I think it, when Strahd separated himself and he came to Mordenshire, he brought with him I think poison is a good term. I mean, he brought that poison of the dark powers with him, and it completely perverted that place, and it drew all of these other individuals in. I think that pretty much covers sort of like the publication history and stuff. The kind of the basic overview of this stuff. We can talk a little bit more when we get into like specifics about certain things. But I think now we're getting pretty long, and we need to talk about the Tarokka deck. So you wanna hop on that, Rob, and wrap us up
sure.
Then?
Do you wanna? I mean, you wanted to introduce the history first, which again,
I think we kind of covered it. I mean, the one thing that I'll say that I didn't cover so far is that what is missing from Curse of Strahd is a key aspect of what the Tarokka deck was originally used for. Right now in Curse of Strahd, what the Tarokka deck does is it tells you where the different magic items are, and it tells you who your ally and enemy is. Or I think it's the enemy of Strahd. Another thing
is that Curse of Strahd? Is that 5th edition?
Curse of Strahd, yeah. And
okay.
let me open it up to the Tarokka Dex section real quick.
Because originally it was where either the Sun Sword or the holy symbol of Ravenkind.
Yeah, that's still there.
Hidden. And then where Strahd could always be found, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
And that's still there.
Okay.
So in Curse of Strahd, you have 5 cards in your Tarokka deck. The first one tells you where the Tomb of Strahd is. The second one tells you where the holy symbol of Ravenkind is. The third tells you where the Sun Sword is. The fourth tells you Strahd's enemy. And the last tells you where Strahd can always be found. Okay. Now, this is different from what it originally was. And originally, your cards, again, it was 5 cards. But so the first card tells you where a powerful force for good and protection against the forces of darkness can be found. Hold on just a second. Yeah. The second one, hold on a second. I mean, without going into much detail, the difference is that one of the cards told you what Strahd's goal was.
Right.
And that gave you a focus for the narrative you created. Mm-hmm. That does not exist in Curse of Strahd, which means there is no focus to the narrative. Right. There are just general things that Strahd wants or likes to do. Like he wants to find the reincarnation of Tatiana. Which actually, when the story begins, when the campaign begins, he's already found her and he's already drank her blood a couple times.
Right.
Which is something else we're going to redux. When in our game, Strahd has not yet found Irina Kolyana, the reincarnation of Tatiana, and her fate truly lies in the hands of the PCs. The other thing is that Strahd wants to find an heir so that he can replace himself and leave. Which it says always fails because Strahd is such a narcissist and so power mad that nobody can ever live up to his expectations. So that's another one that just doesn't go anywhere ultimately. And then there's one other goal which I think is just to fuck with the players.
Yeah, these original goals are not particularly compelling. Strahd seeks a new identity. Strahd wants to make a magical sphere of darkness, which is based on a case of mistaken identity. Your whole party gets, if you pull that one, your whole party gets pulled into Ravenloft because Strahd thinks you have a material component that you don't. And then so when he finds out that you don't have it, he wants to destroy you. It's dumb. You can, especially because the whole thing with the Sun Sword is apparently your fighter has been carrying it this whole time and didn't know it. So it's like, what? Why the one and not the other, right? We can do better than that, right? But the one Strahd wants to win the love of Irina Kolyana, where he basically tries to charm the player characters into being villains so he can save her, which again is totally like 80s thinking. You know, or Strahd wants the Sun Sword because he's afraid of it and he wants to destroy it. That at least makes sense. Yeah, that at least makes sense. You know.
Yeah.
But the other ones are like dumb. So
yeah, I think that like what his actual goals were are pretty weak and can definitely bear working on, or just coming up with completely new goals based on like how we envision Strahd as an individual. But I think what is great about that original one is that you get a goal. Like you at least know what his motivation is. Like right now, like and you know how to focus the campaign then and the adventure. See, like right now, like they've stripped that out, and so Strahd just has these kind of universal goals, and it's not connected to the Tarokka deck. So part of what was prophetic about the Tarokka deck originally was that it gave you an insight into who Strahd is as an individual and what he wants, which you don't get now. Now he has 3 goals, and that's it. You have turn Irina Kolyana, so he wants to get Irina, and he wants to turn her into a vampire so they can be together for all time. But he's already started biting her, so all you can really do is just prevent it from finishing.
Yeah.
The second one is to find Rudolph Van Richten and kill him, which I think that Strahd shouldn't know that Van Richten is even in Barovia right now. Like, Van Richten is in disguise. And if, which means like if Strahd knew that Van Richten was there, what's to prevent him from getting him?
Right.
He can just, if that's really his main goal, then he just gets every werewolf in Barovia, every vampire, every ghost, everything he can he marshals it and he scours the land until he just uncovers him. And then the final one is that, yeah, he's looking for a successor or consort. So ultimately, though, the only way to escape Ravenloft is to kill him, and I think that we can do better. We can offer several different options for how you can get out of Ravenloft, because I think that is the true goal. The true goal is not to kill Strahd. The true goal is to escape. Like in classic horror fashion, people don't want to kill Jason. They just want to escape him.
Right. Yeah.
So at any rate, okay. So tell us about Tarokka.
Okay. Well, let's. All right. So the Tarokka obviously is attempting to be a gaming resource that functions, quote unquote, like the tarot deck, our world's tarot deck, right? Which now it's, to be, if we're being specific, it is not a tarot deck in the fact that it doesn't have the requisite number of cards, which should be 78 if you're being specific. And there's reasons for that. All the actual tarot deck that we know is all about symbolism. It is like a symbolic system, and it talks about a number of things about the magical thinking, everything from planetary and zodiacal influences to actual events and people, all kinds of stuff is what we're supposed to take from the tarot when we use it for divination, one form or another. And so that's kind of what we're thinking about when we're using it for gaming. We're just trying to create either prophetic events, like where something will be, or what I think is more compelling is using it as a way to create the nuance of the story. And so, like, to do that, though, you kind of have to understand the symbols that we're talking about in the first place. And so, like, what's probably prudent is to at least compare and contrast what the Tarokka deck is to the actual tarot and, their uses. So, like, what's interesting is they both have a high deck and a low deck. In the actual tarot, there's 22 cards in the higher arcana. In the Tarokka deck, there's only 14. We only have 14 high cards to deal with. And it's clear that whoever was creating this was not actually an occultist, because they missed some important things. But what's interesting is where they might have gotten certain things right, and I think that'll be interesting to talk about. But the higher arcana basically symbolize the 7 planets, the 7 traditional planets, the 12 zodiac signs, and then the 3 spiritual elements: fire, water, and air. Okay. And that's what the higher arcana is. The lower arcana actually correspond in the tarot deck to the 4 elements: swords being air, cups being water, wands being fire, and pentacles coins being earth. Okay. The Tarokka deck does something similar, but in a very different way. Their low deck is divided into 4, but they're actually based on character classes, which is kind of interesting. So instead of hold on. The other thing that the low deck does is there's basically numbers 1 through 10, and then there's the ace of that deck, as well as the page, knight, king, and queen of each suit, which is where we get suits of cards in our playing cards down the line. The Tarokka deck skips a lot of that stuff, and they sort of combine it all into, like, all the kings and queens, they're all combined into basically one ideal. So we've got the warrior, who is more or less like we could consider it to be the ace of swords, although there is a 1 of swords in the Tarokka deck. There's the rogue, which is the coin guy. There's the wizard, and then there's the priest, right? So they represent the 4 main character classes, and then the 1 through 10 is actually, I think, the original designers were attempting to divide it out based on alignment, which is interesting, and I'll show you what I'm thinking. So we'll use swords, for instance, right? The 1 of swords is the Avenger, right? 2 of swords is the Paladin, and the 3 of swords is the Soldier. Now, the Soldier is interesting because he is actually standing in front of 3 swords, a black sword, a white sword, and a gray sword, and he is reaching for the gray sword. I think that's a clue, because if we look at the Paladin, he would be, of course, our lawful good warrior class, right? The Avenger is probably our chaotic good, and then our Soldier is our neutral good, right? He's reaching for the neutral sword. And by extension, these continue on. So then we have 4, 5, and 6, the Mercenary, the Myrmidon, and the Berserker. Berserker being chaotic neutral, I think. And then we have the 3 evil cards, the Hooded Man, the Thief, the Dictator, the lawful evil one, and the Torturer, who is probably the chaotic evil one, right? So that's just the swords. And I think that's what the designers were thinking when they were doing this. Now, of course, just by doing this is where it breaks down. This is not like tarot, but we could say maybe it's an oracle deck, which is basically any non-tarot deck that you're using or whatever. And so this could be basically, we could think about that whenever we're like looking for clues. We could either consider the class of the card, being swords being warriors, glyphs being, priests or whatever, or we could consider the alignment that these cards represent. So I think that makes this interesting in that perhaps the Tarokka deck is the only way you can detect alignment in Ravenloft. Does that make sense? Right? Pretty cool. If you think about it that way. If you end up pulling the Dictator card, maybe we know that this person's evil. You know what I mean? Or whatever. It's that kind of way to think about it. But
see, that'd be an interesting way where, if you want to do a reading, something specific about trying to, like you could go to the Vistani or Madame Eva and ask, I want to do a reading. I want to have a reading done that will tell me more about this individual that I've met.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly
you could, as the DM, you could stack the deck that way, and you, instead of letting it be random, because I know that a lot of this is about randomizing the locations,
right,
of things and who's who.
Well,
but
right.
Once you get past that, then yeah, you could totally stack the deck. It would be really interesting to have like a stacked deck ready for major NPCs.
Well, and or if you're a really creative GM, you let it be random, and then you create the story based on what the cards got drawn. So another way to do this, for instance, is like, as opposed to just like using what's outlined in the these adventures or whatever. I mean, there are traditional, non-traditional, all kinds of different tarot spreads you can do, but a very, very simple one. There's a 5-card spread that you could do, right? Past, present, and future, greatest ally, greatest enemy, is one way to do it. Or, influences or greatest fears in a 7-card spread. There's all kinds of cool ways to do it that you could get inspired by. And Madame Eva or any of the Vistani could probably do this. Or what would be even more interesting is, you have your own player characters can start to use these cards with their own divinatory purposes or whatever. It could be kind of fun. Obviously, you want to make it more versatile, but it is cool. Like the High Arcana, I do think there's 1 or 2 elements that might be even a little punny, perhaps. Like I think, I'll show you just 2 examples that I'm pretty sure about. I'm pretty sure they meant for the Empress card to be the Temptress card. I'm pretty sure they meant those to be correlations, right? A little punny or whatever. But then, of course, the Hanged Man, which everyone knows, is the Hangman, right? Wah, wah, wah. So there's like little things like that, right? But I do think it's interesting, at least all of the planetary cards of the High Arcana are more or less spoken for. If we can, the one I mean, I don't think we want to go through them individually, but it is kind of cool. We could make a list of the correlations of one to the other. But the one leap, quote unquote, that I had to make was I compared the Raven card, the Raven card to the Sun card. The Sun being sort of the central theme of whatever the drawing is or the person is. The Sun represents the soul. And so the soul of Ravenloft is the Raven, right? That's kind of the leap that I made, right? But other than that, they're pretty close, man. And so there's some cool stuff. Now, the zodiacal stuff is less so, and is a little, but there's at least 4, one for each element. And what's also interesting is, like, I suppose we wouldn't need to be concerned about zodiacal influences in a world where the dark powers can play with time and space and whatever anyway. It's not like we have to have 12 months and Ravenloft or whatever. So like that, I don't mind that part falls apart a little more. But like, for instance, I know in previous shows we had talked about, either the alphabet of desire or the holy hexagram. Knowing your correspondences with this stuff, you could use it in that dynamic too. Could be very, very interesting. For another drawing, for instance, you could lay out the hexagram. I actually had a magician friend who was doing that with the Thoth deck and getting some pretty interesting results.
Here, actually, I'll. Why don't I share the Tarokka reading that I constructed for when my players entered into Ravenloft? So I did this because I have folded Curse of Strahd into my ongoing campaign. And so the events of Curse of Strahd are supposed to connect directly into what's happening outside and kind of illuminate and uncover mysteries and all that kind of stuff. So I ended up like doing a stacked reading. So it was all predetermined. It was not random. And personally, like, I think there's you could go either way. As a DM, if you want to stack the deck, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I see nothing wrong with that. If you have a specific vision in mind for how you want things to play out. But I ended up going with a 6-card reading rather than the 5. And so my cards ended up representing past, present, future, ally, enemy, and fate.
Okay.
So mine, like, I mean, they can still uncover the locations of these different things, in Curse of Strahd, but the true purpose of this was to be a real prophetic reading, clues, a riddle to the ultimate truth of my game. And so for past, the card was the broken one. And and Madame Eva is the one who's reading this. So as I was drawing the cards, I'm in Madame Eva's voice, and I am reading the cards and looking at them, and So at any rate, for the broken one, she says, "The suffering of someone very important to you has set you upon this path. Their work must be completed." Now, I'm not going to go into the meaning behind all of these, but this one is one that the player who was the focus of this reading understood right away. And in his background, his father was a kind of a mad scientist type wizard studying this forbidden school of magic that was believed throughout the multiverse to be a fool's errand. Like, it never functions. No one has ever been able to figure it out. We call it the secret math. Rob has it in his game. I have it in my game. It's kind of slightly different depending on if it's his or mine. But we both kind of utilize this idea of the secret math, and it's all connected to the Cthulhu mythos. But it's this type of magic that exists outside the normal realm. It's something that, like, the god Mystara might govern the weave within the multiverse, but the secret math exists beyond the weave. So this character's father, his father never finished his work, and as a result of his study of the secret math, he was kidnapped and tortured horribly, and then murdered and left on the streets. And so that's what that ended up referring to. So moving on to, that was his past. His present is the ghost. So, and she said, You have recently discovered a secret that was buried long ago, a secret that holds the key to everything which will come. And that's the secret math. This forbidden, lost school of magic. Then there's the future, which was the artifact card. Your success hinges upon an object of great power, but choosing how to use it will be the greatest challenge of your life. That has yet to be revealed, so I'll just leave that there. And then there's the ally, and this is the PC's ally, which was the necromancer. This is someone or something that represents obsessions wholly unnatural. It will seem like your enemy. So they have yet to discover who that might be or what that might be, because the ally might not necessarily be a person, might be a thing or an idea. Then who their enemy is, not Strahd's enemy, their enemy. The beast, a malevolent primal force stalks you. It lurks just beyond a threshold no mortal has the power to cross. And this is another one where I think that they might have guesses at what it might be, but that is another thing that has yet to fully reveal itself in my game.
Did you stack the deck for those drawings?
Oh yeah, I
okay. No, it's funny. I just, as a quick weird aside, I too have used this. I've used the Tarokka deck as a storytelling device. I actually used it in my actual play podcast, Blackspire, where I had my main character do this drawing. He drew a 5 card, but we made it random. I didn't give him every card. I stacked it slightly, but I had over 20 that he could draw from that would correspond to different beats of the adventure. And he drew most of the cards you're talking about.
Oh shit.
Who you were, he drew the Raven. That has its own story to it. I think we talked about that on our other legend lore. But who you were was the Raven. Who you are is the beast. Who you will be was the broken one. Your greatest ally was the Dark Lord.
Oh yeah, and I have the Dark Lord.
And your greatest enemy was the Torturer.
Okay, so there's some. They're not quite in the same place.
Well, right, but I also included the low. He drew mostly high Arcana, even though I had included a lot of the low. It was interesting, but anyway.
So and then the last card, the 6th card, is I termed this Fate, and actually this ended up. I stacked the deck, and I ended up. This is like a twist that I added. It was supposed to be a 6-card reading, but there was a 7th card stuck to the 6th.
Right.
So when Madame Eva first drew the card, the Dark Lord came up. And she says, "You will wield immense and terrible power at the expense of all." But then she notices there was a card stuck to it. And when she got all like, "Ooh, what does this mean?" And then she pulls the card out and it's the dungeon. And she basically says to them, "Interesting. This suggests that perhaps your fate is not sealed." So the dungeon, she said, "Your power will imprison you, but the preceding card suggests this is an opposing path that will be for the benefit of all." So it's like this idea, this suggestion that things could go either way. It's all up to you in the end. That you have your fate exists outside the bounds of the powers within the multiverse. And of course, it all connects back to the secret math and how the secret math is something that exists outside the realm of what we understand of the multiverse and so on and so forth. So at any rate, like I think that the key here is that I think it's important, like we think it's important that the Tarokka deck be more than just quest giver, more than just determining the location of things,
or just the way that you piece the puzzle together. You know, it should have each of these cards. I mean, yeah, they've been gothicized, right? They're all dark versions of the tarot deck. And you can, some of them, there's pretty clear the nods that they're making. The 6 of coins is so clearly the 6 of pentacles. Yeah. Except what's interesting is it's focused on the beggar as opposed to the man distributing the coin. But regardless, it's still there. It's still that image. But for the most part, they were just trying to make nods to like these being tools for your player characters to use. Like these different classes, so to speak, that you could compare. But like as long as you're keeping it's more than just like Aaron's saying, the overt, like this is where the sword is going to be in this place. You could also like take the theme of that that card, and that could tell you the nature of how they need to go about getting it. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. And so like the more you dive into it and like understanding sort of the structure and framework of what quote unquote the cards are trying to say is how you can go ahead and achieve that, you know?
Yeah. And I have a suggestion too. Like if you want to keep it random, you don't want to stack the deck, and you want that aspect of, gameplay, which is perfectly valid. And I think most people probably want that. Try to set it up where your card reading, your Tarokka reading happens at the very end of the session as a cliffhanger. Mm-hmm. So you get to Madame Eva's caravan, and she plays the cards. Oh, you've got the broken one. You have the ghost, the artifact. And then, as she begins to tell you the meaning of all of this, you say, next time on D&D. And you leave it. And then what you do is, in the meantime, you take those 5 cards or 6 cards or however many Tarokka deck cards you want to play, and you figure out what it really is. Because, obviously, Rob could probably do this on the fly because he has a lot of experience with tarot. And so he's thought about this. But I think for most of us, we don't have... we're not intimate. We're not intimately familiar with the meaning of all different cards and what they represent. And so take that time to then build your story of the Tarokka deck, so that when you come back, you open up and she goes through and she tells the prophecy, and the story. And you decide what, in addition to indicating the location of these things, what else does it tell you about yourself and your place in Ravenloft and the possible outcomes that lie before you.
And the one last thing that I would add to that as advice is, whenever possible, listen to your players' speculations as they speculate. Oh, could this be the Myrmidon? Oh, could this be the Torturer? Does that represent this? Does that represent that? And it's like, crumple, crumple, crumple. That's what it means now.
Yeah. That instant headcanon retcon, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as if you can keep that secret from the players. I do that all the time. Like, I'll have an idea for, or I've decided what a thing is, or what the reason for something happening is, and then I'll sit and I'll listen to my players postulate and argue with each other across the table at what this could all mean. And every once in a while, they come up with an idea that I never thought of, and I'm like, "That's pretty cool. That's what it is now." You're like, "Yeah, like rip that up, throw it out. It's that now. It's what you said."
And that's a sign of a good GM. That they'll take the best idea, not just theirs.
So I think that's we're just about out of time for class today. I think the bell is about to ring.
I think so.
So I'm going to say class dismissed, and thanks for watching. And like I said, this first episode is basically the Ravenloft overview. And from now on out, they're going to become Patreon-only episodes. So you can head on over. We're going to put in our comments a link to our Patreon page. You can go over there. We have 2 different tiers that you can get access to the show through. Our expert tier, which is $5, and which has other stuff too available. You get early access to our Adventure Hook episodes. You get, we do, like, sometimes with an episode we'll create some, downloadable like PDF content or whatever. You get access to that. You get some other stuff, and that's $5 a month. And then for $8, you get the Realm of Terror tier, and there you will get instant access to the live feed, so you can come watch us as we are recording, which means you can live comment, and we will watch your comments, and we will respond to those in real time. And then,
like you were in class, like a real class.
You were in class, you can raise your hand.
Yep.
and we'll do our best. Or if you have a correction, because there's so much here, I'm sure that there's going to be little things that we get incorrect and get wrong. And so, we're perfectly willing to be corrected Not only that, but we are going to be releasing, the actual Redux content. So, like for instance, we said the first thing we should do is to update the powers checks for 5th edition. That's going to be content that will only be accessible by the Realm of Terror contributors.
And we'll be going. And another thing I think that we realized that we should do is I'll make a good tarot card to Tarokka deck translation guide, so that you'll be able to figure out which ones correspond to which ones, and maybe even a little bit of what they might mean.
Yeah. So our next show will be the end of March. We're going to do these once a month, and so stay tuned. And we'll keep you updated through Patreon and social media. You can follow me at Old Man Campbell, and Rob is at The Reliquim. Or you can follow both of us on at Adventure Hook, and look for us on Facebook and wherever else. Subscribe. I don't know if it really matters that you subscribe to your YouTube channel, because this is all we're doing. So, but you can go ahead and subscribe, because it'll alert you when these things go live, I believe. So, and I think that's it. So, unless you have anything else to add, Rob.
I think that's pretty good. Just, make sure to, check back with us in a month. And in the meantime, get caught up on episodes of Adventure Hook if you haven't been keeping up with that show. Or if you're really, really inclined, come check out my Black Spire Actual Play podcast too. You might enjoy that.
Yeah. And look out for other stuff. Infidel through Image for me, serial artist. For Rob, you can find all that on Amazon or wherever else. I mean, they sell stuff, PDFs and things like that. I am going to be, when we hear, I will have been to Emerald City Comic Con.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So if you're going to be in Seattle in a couple weeks for Emerald City Comic Con, I am at Artist Alley table in 11. And I'm going to have like some cool posters of Infidel and some other covers and stuff that I've done, and whatever else I do, sketches and things like that. So at any rate,
cool.
Self-grandizing. I think it's time to do this class. So
okay, class dismissed.
All right.